welcome y'all! That's right. This is the Pregame Engineer Tailgate Mayor Racing Podcast, episode number 74. It's Tuesday, November 29, 2016. I'm Tailgate Mayor Rusty Wallace, joined in the PETM Podcast studio in Atlanta, Georgia by Pregame Engineer Andrew Sherman. What's up, buddy?
Well, I just love doing this thing. Obviously, I'm down here. I always have a hard time getting started. I never know what I want to say. I can tell you this, though. Our guest today is the most grammatically intelligent person we've had yet on the podcast.
You're going to make him puke just sitting there laughing at you.
You say that without knowing what I scored on my SAT verbal. Would probably be less.
Hey, I got a 590, so that's all.
Yeah, see, exactly.
I think that's what I had.
You were above me.
Wow. Oh, well, there you go. And now he's in the journalism. Folks, we want to welcome on the show today. He's NASCAR reporter for NBC Sports. He's the host of the NASCAR and NBC podcast, and just really all-around great guy to follow, listen to, and especially listening to his podcast and stuff. He's always got different drivers on. Anyway, it's Mr. Nate Ryan. Nate Ryan, what's up today, man?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege, and I really appreciate all the support you guys have thrown the NASCAR and NBC podcast, and it's good to be here.
Awesome. Well, we start the show the same way every day. I mean, and we're so appreciative of you being here. It's really cool, and especially being off season. You know, there's not much to talk about. Usually, we've last off season we goofed off a lot and had a lot of fun, is what it was. I think we've had more fun off season just BSing and being silly, haven't we?
Well, the stress level is lower because you do not have to deliver any real content. that's like current event related, so you can just do whatever you want to do.
Yeah. So these are the episodes that last forever, right? Because there's nothing.
Some of our most fun episodes from
I tell you what,
the first 74 were definitely between Thanksgiving and the Daytona 500.
Yep. So Nate, every week we do the same thing, and every day we probably doing the same thing, drinking. Make sure we're laughing there. But every week we always ask everybody what you're drinking today. So Nate, what you drinking on today?
Not at the moment, but if I was imbibing as you are right now, Rusty, it'd probably be a hop, drop, and roll.
Tell us about that.
The No Dob Brewing Company in Charlotte. My favorite spirit, probably, of local microbrewers, which are ubiquitous in the Charlotte area. I don't know if you guys have ever been up here, but they have one on every block now, it seems. But that would be my recommendation. Hop, drop, and roll from No Dob Brewing.
Hop, drop, and roll.
Hop, drop, and roll.
Well,
I haven't had that one.
Good thing we got this thing recording. We go to Charlotte. Shoot, we've probably averaged once every couple of years now.
Yeah, probably.
And you make a trip up there for some reason or another, either go to the hall or go to the race.
Well, I've got to go through there for work on the 14th, so maybe I'll
bring some back. Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's a great choice then. Nate, what'd you do for Thanksgiving? Did you have some fun?
I spent it in the Sarasota area in Florida with my mom.
Oh, cool. Drive down or fly down?
What's that?
Drive down or fly down?
Much to my chagrin, my wife and I drove with our dog, which was about 10 hours each way. Airfares aren't cheap going into the Sarasota area.
Well, and overall, who knows? You might have saved time with all the Thanksgiving travel and mess that's going on.
That's how I tried to rationalize
right?
it.
Yes. Yeah. Let's keep telling ourselves that.
I expect the Charlotte airport may have been impacted by all the smoke from the fires.
Yeah, how's it been over there?
Actually, it wasn't. I actually flew out that day to Miami. The first day, I walked out of my house and really noticed the wildfires. I used to live in Southern California, and it reminded me of when I used to live in the Inland Empire near San Bernardino, and on days when the wildfires would rage out there, you could smell it in the city. And that's what it was like in Charlotte the day I left for Miami 2 weeks ago tomorrow. So, thankfully it didn't impact things too much here, but it was a little disconcerting to have North Carolina feel like Southern California from a wildfire perspective. Not good.
Yikes. Well, speaking of on fire, how about the football this past weekend? You follow any teams of your own? And a big fan of you got a school that you root for?
I have a school I went to
okay.
that I root for, usually in vain. That would be Northwestern. But they did win. Became bowl eligible at 6-6, which
nice.
is always a big deal for the Wildcats.
Indeed. That's fantastic.
Very nice. So
it wasn't quite Georgia Tech beating Georgia.
Well, that was more
Very
fun
proud.
than we should normally get to have, which is why we had a lot of fun.
Exactly. Well, the other thing we do every episode besides what you're drinking, we talk about our car number. It's episode number 74. We're looking up car number 74. Sherwin, it's another winless car. I can't believe it. Yeah. Of all the races, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of.
It feels like we see that number a lot. I think it's because it runs pretty regular in the Xfinity series.
That might be it. So I got two guys for you. First one, LD Austin, and I searched. I mean, I went deep on this one, and I just couldn't find much information about him, which sucks because I love getting more and more information. But the reason I bring him up, he was born in 1918 and had 161 races in the number 74 car, and raced from 1957 and 1962. So one of the old guys there. He had a couple top fives, no big wins or anything. Finished top 10 in points 3 times. He got 6th place in 1958. He's the one that I posted the car on Twitter on. So if you go look at our at the Twitter, I think we retweeted on the podcast handle and all that. But it's old school Chevrolet looking good.
Yeah, it looked like those sporty Malibus from the mid 1950s.
Mm-hmm. Second one, Bobby Wawak.
What?
Wawak?
Are we in Star Wars?
Right. Star Wars, something or other. Nate, have you heard of him before?
I have not.
Have not. He had 71 races in the 74 car. That's a little over half of his 140 races in NASCAR. Spanned 17 years, 1965 to 1987. His sort of claim to fame, which is kind of a gruesome tale here, not death-wise, but a little weird here. He was one of those catalysts for better safety. And Sherwin, it's weird. It feels like we talk about that a lot on the podcast when we're looking up these guys that are, they got into something and now everybody does something different. But
yeah, well, we talked about like greatest of all time and comparing eras, and it's like we're talking about some guys that race with no gloves and no shoes and no helmets and rags in their mouth.
Or them penny loafers. And
then we're talking about what we're doing now, and it's like, how do you compare those? And it's really tough. But all along the way, somebody had to pioneer some piece of safety to get to where we are today.
Mm-hmm. So in 1977 Daytona 500, his fuel line broke. He had fire in the cockpit. He actually jumped out of the car before it even came to a stop, and the car went off and hit a wall. And he held up his hands, and some photographer took a picture, and they were saying it looked like his gloves had melted into his hands. And the kind of gruesome part here is he wasn't wearing any gloves. So it was a catalyst for change. I think after that race, every driver started wearing gloves. So it's one of those deals. So unfortunately, Bobby died in 2004. Had nothing to do with that car wreck or anything. But so let's raise our glasses here.
Goodness, what was he, 86?
LD Austin, Bobby Wawak.
Cheers.
Cheers to him. Sherwin, I don't think we talked about what you're drinking over there. What you got?
I got a Heavy Seas Loose Cannon IPA.
Well done.
Yeah, they call it the Hop 3. I'm not really sure what that is. I'm sure it means it's 3 different kinds of hops.
I've got the Jekyll Brewing Company, a local Fixin' 2 session IPA. I've been really getting into sessions lately because it just means I can, drink all day.
Yeah, well, it's like dry hop Miller Lite.
Right? Something that's got a little taste to it and all that. So, all right, Nate, let's kick this thing off. Love to hear about. You're one of the guys who really goes after the story. You're always getting the story from all these other guys. We'd love to hear your story. And if you can maybe kick us off, tell us about your story, how you got started in journalism, and how you got into NASCAR.
Sure, Rusty. Well, I've told this story many times, and I often joke that it probably comes as no surprise that to some that the first race I covered was also the first race I ever attended. I didn't know much about racing.
Yeah, I think we hear that a few times among our journalist guests.
Feels like Jeff Gluck had the same.
Yeah, right.
It is a bit of a recurring theme. So my first job out of school, as I mentioned before, I worked in Southern California at the San Bernardino newspaper, and I was hired as a copy editor. And a few months into the job, I realized, hey, I kind of like writing better than I like editing. And the quandary I found myself in there was, I couldn't just say, well, you got the Dodgers or the UCLA beat or Lakers. I just put me on one of those. I sort of had to take whatever was available, and we had a freelancer who was covering motorsports, and he left, And on a staff of, I think, a dozen full-time people, I was the only person who raised my hand and said I wanted to cover auto racing. So through that very selective process, I became an auto racing beat writer, and it was a plum assignment. I thought everybody missed the boat on this. The first thing I got to cover was the Long Beach Grand Prix. I got to cover some NHRA events. This was 1996, and a year after I took that beat on, what was then called California Speedway opened up in Fontana, and that was right in our circulation coverage area. That was about 15 miles west of San Bernardino, so that was a huge deal. First time NASCAR returned to Southern California in 9 years, and I was spearheading our coverage without hardly knowing anything about racing, and I sort of fell in love with everything about racing. I was sort of drawn to it. Not so much really maybe the competitive side, although certainly the personalities and the teams and all that I found compelling. I was more like the like tug of war between, all the different constituencies in NASCAR, whether it's sponsors or fans or teams or drivers, the sanctioning body, all of those things and how they were so intertwined sort of fascinated me. So I fell into covering it then, and it's been, I guess, a love affair that's lasted almost 2 decades.
That's awesome. That's a very funny story. How was your first article that you wrote? If you go back and look at it, do you laugh like, oh well, the car it went around in circles? Sure did.
Thankfully, none of them were quite that rudimentary, but I did save everything I wrote. So I'll go back and read them, and some of the conclusions I drew were probably quite facile compared to now, and there are probably things I missed that were glaring and obvious. But it is fun to go back and sort of re-examine like my wide-eyed perspective on NASCAR as a young media tyke that I was back then. It is kind of fun to revisit sometimes.
What was your first big holy crap moment? Like, I can't believe I'm talking to this guy, or I can't believe I'm here, or something like that.
I probably didn't really appreciate it at the time, but when, as I mentioned, when California Speedway opened up, there were all these media events in conjunction with that, and one of them was Miller Lite did this thing at a Legends track, or I don't know if it was a Legends track, it might have just been a dirt track somewhere in San Bernardino with some Legends cars, and Rusty Wallace and Don Prudhomme were there. And I barely knew who either of these people were at the time, but I got 10 minutes with Rusty Wallace, and I had Don Prudhomme coaching me on how to work my way through the gears in this car. Obviously, he knows a little bit about shifting, although he only would do it at 5, 6 second intervals. And that was maybe after I had that assignment, and looking back on it in the years afterward, I sort of thought, man, I probably didn't realize how lucky I was as a 24-year-old who was completely new, not just to sports journalism, but to covering racing in general. I got to talk to 2 champions and legends, Hall of Famers.
That's really cool. How about now? This one was one that I think one of our fans actually asked when Jeff Gluck was on, and he had a great story. And I imagine there's a lot of, especially folks like you who've been in this for so long, that you have some fun stories. So do you have any good story about something that you forgot before a race, or something, just a funny race story like that?
My story is, first of all, let me preface this, it's not as good as Jeff Gluck's. Mine does not involve forgetting pants or articles of clothing or a hard card or credential. Mine happened a year ago, and it was when I was headed to the season finale in Miami, 2015, and I was in the process of trying to get all these segments before the end of the season, so that I could reach a certain status on American Air, which is really quite foolhardy, but it's something if you travel a lot, you understand.
Sherwin and I are frequent travelers. We've got our Delta stuff.
So my flight to Miami consisted of me going from Charlotte to Boston to Reagan National to Miami.
Doing the
what better way to get there?
Doing the leg.
So somewhere in the course of that trip, I realized the next day when I got to media day that I had left my digital recorder on one of the planes
Oh boy!
On the way down there, and this is a digital recorder that had. I'm very much a pack rat. I'm very sentimental. This is a digital recorder that I had in my possession since 2007, and I had taped umpteen interviews on this thing in those 8 years or whatever. So I spent the next month trying to get it back, and eventually I did. And as soon as I did, I retired it, and it's now in a drawer up in my office. But I thought for a long period of time that I was going to lose this hugely, well, significant only to me, really, digital recorder. I did survive the weekend, of course, because my trusty colleague Dustin Long has tons of recorders at his disposal. So I just used another one, but I didn't have my trusty digital recorder for the season finale last year. I don't think it impacted my coverage, but that's my story of almost forgetting something.
Certainly understand the sentimentality. I guess I'm kind of surprised. I mean, I understand if you had something you were using for a long time that you would want to keep using it, kind of just familiarity. But when you had to stop short, why didn't you just use your phone? Is there something about the digital recorders that is better?
I have this thing, this software program that it's Olympus that dates to the first digital recorder I bought in 2004. And this software dates is literally like 13 or 14 years old. It's the only transcription software I know how to use. I have function keys that allow me to transcribe much faster because I have to have it, in this particular form. So the only digital recorders I've been able to find that work with this transcription software are Olympus. And so this was an Olympus brand. And I can't use a phone because I can't connect it to the Olympus software. So that's my long, drawn-out answer for why the phone.
No, that's complete.
Really
I like it. We get sucked into our ways one way or another, things that we like, how they work and stuff, and that's part of life.
Shoot, I'm doing our show notes.
I've been described as a creature of habit. I know that probably comes as stunning, given the stories I've told so far.
I'm nothing if not a creature of habit.
I'm doing our show notes on Notepad. I'm sure there's better things, and I formatted myself. Yeah, I know what you mean. Nate, you're a fellow podcaster. How did you get started with doing the whole podcasting thing? Was that your idea? Was that somebody else kind of saying, "Hey, we need somebody to do a podcast," and you just sort of raise your hand again?
It was a little bit of both, Rusty. I wore them down to some degree. I started asking as soon as I began at NBC Sports if we could start a podcast, and initially the reception was a little mixed. But toward the end of last year and the beginning of this year, NBC Sports went in the direction of doing more podcasts. They hired actually somebody, Tess Quinlan, to produce. Her primary duty is to produce podcasts. She produces virtually all of mine. So there was some serendipity there that at the time, I decided podcasting was what I wanted to do. That was around the time that NBC Sports also realized, hey, this is a platform we really want to be engaged in as well. What really motivated me to do it was I became a podcast fan about 2 or 3 years ago, and there's a few favorites that I have. I highly recommend, if anybody's a music fan, Sound Opinions. That is a terrific podcast. There's another one called Long Form that if you like writing, I think it's a great way to sort of explore the craft. Sometimes their guests can be a little bit insufferable and pretentious, and they become it just becomes an hour of self-aggrandizement, which is not really good. But what's great about this long-form podcast is the hosts. They have 3 hosts, and they ask great questions. And I almost like listening to the podcast for the questions as much as I do the answers, especially when, again, the guests can be so pretentious. And so I've always felt like one of the weaknesses of my game was interviewing. And I feel like branching out into podcasting has forced me to try to become a better interviewer. And so that's... I love the format. I love what you guys do and others do, and how it can be all things to all people, and the way it's consumed is just, I think, ingenious as well. That people can just click a button on their smartphone and it's downloaded and they can listen to it at their convenience. But for me, what really sells it as a medium for me is the interviewing And granted, I try to avoid calling them interviews. I call them conversations because I feel like that is the optimized podcast. Is I feel like if you feel like you're eavesdropping on a really good confab between a couple of friends or people with similar interests or whatever, that's what makes a great podcast. So I guess that's what really draws me to it.
That's a great point. And I start thinking about some of the podcasts that Sherwin and I kind of listened to, and that's exactly what it was. Sherwin, if you remember some of these guys, it does feel like you're eavesdropping into somebody. Ours are, I would say, a little more off-color in terms of our inspirations there. But, a few comedians and stuff, and, a few, for me, if there was a couple technology ones that I listened to, and, same sort of thing. And
I'm trying to think of I'm assuming now, looking back, and I may not be remembering correctly, but I'm assuming the first one that I listened to was Marty and McGee, and it was like through ESPN Radio, and that's when I discovered what iPodcast was, and then it just kind of blew up from there. Like, it ended up being like Joe Rogan and Fighter and the Kid and Bill Burr and a lot of more. I'm more of a comedian. I listen to the NASCAR stuff and I listen to the comedian stuff. I'll grab some other stuff every now and again from people that I'm aware of, but. I think the ones that are the most entertaining is, A, did you learn something while you listened to it? Yep. Or were you entertained? Those are the two things. Like, was it entertaining from an introspective perspective? Like, did you think, did it cause you to think, the Jimmy Valvano thing? Or did you laugh? Mm-hmm. And those are the two things that we try to do both of those when we can.
Well, let's talk about NASCAR, huh? It's about time to talk.
Is this
NASCAR,
a NASCAR podcast?
I think it's a NASCAR
that's what we
podcast.
bill it as.
We say it as sometimes. Who knows?
A lot of folks are finding out how much different the off season is going to be when there's not.
Oh yeah,
like just a rolling bevy of news and activity on track. Although we do have news to talk about.
We have big news to talk about. So let's. Here's our little sound effect there. It's probably not professional to just call out when I'm going to play a sound effect too, right? It's supposed to be smooth,
Yeah, I mean, one day.
Here I go.
When we
sound
have
effect,
a producer.
Blam. Yeah, right. Let's see, Nate. First off, I think the most recent news, I'm just skipping down in my notes here a bit, but just because this one's so recent with Chris Buescher joining JT Daughtry for 2017, and almost. I would say bigger news. Although, Sherwin, we even kind of hinted at it. It was maybe one of those, poorly kept secrets. But Roush, cutting another spot. Nate, what's the deal there, and what do you think of all that?
It certainly doesn't seem to portend very good things for Roush. It certainly seems like it's a survival instincts at play here. For me, one of the most significant takeaways, and I saw some other colleagues saying this tonight on social media, is that this is the depths to which Roush Fenway has kind of fallen, that they're farming out their top prospect to a Chevrolet team. Given their deep ties to Ford, and they were really the flagship team of the Blue Oval for so many years, and it's been really a fairly precipitous decline over the last few seasons, where they've gone from runner-up in the points in 2011 with Carl Edwards to now, 2 cars next season. And when you think about that, they loaned Buescher to JTG Doherty Racing. Really, you can make a really strong case now that JTG Doherty is ahead of Roush on the pecking order. Both of their drivers, Allmendinger and Buescher, finished ahead of Bain and Stenhouse, the Roush drivers. They both have 2 cars, and the prospects for 2017 right now are really, I don't want to say dim, but it's going to be a real test of will here, I think, for Roush Fenway to if it wants to regain its glory days.
Yeah, well, I think we had heard some momentum for this sort of activity to be announced, where somehow Roush would loan their driver to a Chevy team that may have a little bit better status. The water cooler talk around the folks, friends of mine that are like third-tier NASCAR fans, or whatever you want to call it, they're like out somewhere near Jupiter. Like, they know that the sport exists. They have watched it. They don't always watch it. Is, the ultimate shock that Roush has contracted to 2 teams.
Yep.
And they would somehow be 3rd or 4th in the pecking order with Ford. And also, conversely, that Stewart-Haas switching from Chevy to Ford means they go from Chevy number 3 to Ford number 1, and how much that means in terms of factory support and why they might make that decision. It's a shame for Roush, who used to be such a proud organization.
Yeah, I mean, you
Hopefully
think about
they
this
can survive.
10 years ago or something, you know? I mean, shoot.
They had 5 cars
were...
in the chase in 2005. Of the 10, they had 5.
Yeah.
All 5 of their cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you nailed it, Sherwin, in that, like, you know, the manufacturer part of this equation, and with Stewart-Haas going to Ford next year, we know that they left for a sweetheart deal. And, you know, God knows how much cash or trade outs they're getting, an engine or chassis, which they're now going to build their own. I mean, I just, between them, Penske, Wood Brothers, I don't see there being a lot left over in the Ford kitty, if anything, for Roush next year. And I think, you know, that's why you're seeing Chris Buescher go to a Chevy affiliated team. I don't think that would be possible if there were a level of support for Roush commensurate with what, you know, they've gotten in previous seasons. And I think, again, that's kind of an ominous sign.
What's the teardown on that? What do you think happened to Roush? Is there, I don't know, less interest in the sport by even Mr. Roush himself? Or is there, just poor decisions there, or just getting, all his people being picked off? I mean, obviously a few of his people got picked off. I guess that just keeps happening, actually.
It's a good question, Rusty, to try to see what the tipping point was or when things began to go downhill. I think it was around, if I had to put my finger on it, I'd say probably 7 or 8 years ago. I think it was 2009, where I don't know if they had 1 car in the chase in 2009 or maybe 0 cars. I remember Kenseth didn't make it, and I don't think Edwards made it that year. So maybe nobody from Roush. Or maybe somebody. I think somebody did make it, because I think 2015 was the first year they didn't have a car in the chase. But anyway, that was the year that they were coming off Edwards finishing second in points in 2008, and things seemed to be heading the right direction. They got way off in 2009, and a lot of it was tied to computer simulation stuff. And it's odd to say this, because Jack Roush is the engineer's engineer, as you guys I'm sure can relate to. I mean, he talks like somebody who grew up in a world of physics to explain how to make race cars go fast. And yet I think that's been the Achilles heel of that organization. And that's been the area where they've gotten off track. And as the engineering explosion, which, it's not recent. I mean, we're in year 15 or 16 of this being the overarching trend in NASCAR. But there was some point, I feel like, where that team veered off the path a little bit too much. And even though they're led by a guy who is so, nuts and bolts numbers, they couldn't find their way back onto it fast enough to keep up with Hendrick or Stewart-Haas or Joe Gibbs Racing, or even Furniture Row Racing. I hear about how good their simulation programs are, even as a 1-car team, soon to be 2. But that's what sets them apart, and that is the key to going fast these days. If you don't have your engineering and your computer simulations top notch, you're not going to be there.
Yeah, 100%. That 7-shaker rig, I guess they called it a 5-post rig back when we're talking about Roush was still extremely relevant and winning races. And then it kind of migrated rather quickly to the 7-post shaker rig, and they were talking about how teams would rent time, because a private company would actually own the thing and rent the space and time to all teams to get to use it. And then it was nah, if you want to compete, you got to have that thing in-house, and you have to develop a simulator program that shows all the way a car would react around the whole racetrack for 500 miles. You'd load that program in, bolt your chassis to it, and see what happens. And that that evolution happened extremely fast.
Overnight. And that's a really good example. That was about 10 years ago. I think the 2007 season was when it did seem like overnight everybody suddenly had to have a 7-post rig, which was a 7-figure investment that teams just made at the drop of a hat. And granted, that was a different environment. Sponsorship was a lot more flush back then. Teams had cash to spend. But I feel like that's the kind of keeping up with the Joneses that NASCAR and racing to some extent is all about. And if you can't keep up, if you fall behind even by like one little step in an area like that, it can be fatal.
Yeah, I think that's what we've seen with Roush, and it's unfortunate. Well, we saw it happen with Evernham, probably the most recent sort of a
big fold.
Relatively strong team put two cars in the chase at early on, and then just kind of evaporated. And I don't know if that's Evernham lost interest and was ready to start his family
money
or
stuff
what you want to talk about
too,
there.
yeah.
But if you don't keep up and you don't spend the money on parts, I think we remember hearing Casey cussing about brakes before he actually ended up finishing the season in that Red Bull 84 car. But what was that, 2010, and then he ended up running the whole season the next year. But it's if you don't stay up with everything that's happening in front of you, you will go behind. And it doesn't matter how good your driver is.
Yep.
We don't know how good of a driver Ricky Stenhouse is because he's in a bad car.
Yep. Yeah,
and that's a very sobering realization.
It's funny when you think about, Roush has said that he thinks that Stenhouse, he said this a couple years ago in the preseason, that Stenhouse would be better than any driver he's ever had on his team. And I truly don't think he was feeding us a line when he said that. I think he truly believed it. And if you talk to other people who have seen Ricky Stenhouse Jr. race sprint cars, they say he has unbelievable amounts of talent. But you're right, like a good driver, a superstar driver can't carry an average car, and it's been a trend that's gotten reinforced more and more in recent seasons as this thing has gotten more and more technical and more engineered and more aero development, and it's one of the reasons. And Tony Stewart has talked about it. It's one of the reasons that he left. I think he felt like where he was in being able to carry a car in 2016 versus 1999, his first year in the Sprint Cup Series. I mean, they were night and day, and I think that did have an impact on why he decided to retire from NASCAR.
Well, I think that's a great segue for us to go into what happened over at Germain Racing, because the reason why I think it's a good segue is we're talking about a developing driver that has shown some promise, maybe not as much as we'd like to. Ty Dillon getting in the Germain Racing 13 car, but is he getting into a car that has a real chance for him to translate what he knows about racing to making a car go fast, and that ultimately translating to success? Because I say, sitting in my chair today, no. And so I would question why that is the right move for Ty Dillon.
That's a good point. And Casey Mears, he hadn't been able to do anything in that car. And, I mean, he's a veteran who's, back in his day, he was on top of everything. I watched a special one time where he and Jimmy Johnson went out to some indoor, not even a circle track. It was one of them tracks in France that, the bridge goes over the top and then under. I forget what the name of it is and all that. It's crazy. And they were out there having fun doing that. And that was because Casey Mears, and they did this special because, Casey Mears and Jimmy Johnson, obviously Jimmy was the better driver at that point, and obviously today still, but they were at least in the same conversation, and to see him in that, in the Germain Racing, that just goes to, further solidify Nate's point there. But, yeah, Nate, how about Ty Dillon in 13?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Casey Mears, Rusty, because I had forgotten how many bites at the apple he had gotten until somebody had mentioned a couple of days ago. I mean, he started at Ganassi, he raced at Hendrick for a few seasons. He had a year at Richard Childress Racing and what became the Clint Boyer ride. And he's eked out a pretty decent career. And given what he's had to work with, and I can remember you mentioned that with Jimmy Johnson. I think if you go back to 2001, who's the prospect with a brighter future? Everybody would have said Casey Mears, because at that time he was still running IndyCar. I remember him finishing fourth for Bobby Rahal at Fontana in a race. So I think you got to give him credit for the career he's had. But if you're Germain Racing, I think this move makes a lot of sense because they have the business relationship with Richard Childress Racing. From what I understand, that's going to get sweetened a little bit. Apparently now they're going to get pit crews from RCR instead of having to field their own. And I mean, Ty Dillon he's an accomplished driver but he's going to come at a bit of a discount, I think, versus like what you'd have to spend on the open market for a driver who might have the same ability and not nearly maybe the same upside. I mean, Ty Dillon, just by virtue of being, I don't know how many years younger, probably 15 years younger than Casey Mears, has more potential. And I'm not saying he's going to get in that car and win, but does he give you a chance to probably run as well as Casey Mears has been running? And does he give you a chance to maybe improve your economic viability and business model because of the Childress relationship? I mean, you're hiring the guy's grandson. So,
well, that was
it's probably going to help you on many fronts.
That was my very first reaction to this, because we've heard this rumor for 2 months now that this might happen. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of planned for it, because places we hear the rumors that we have a lot of value for, basically they're batting 1,000. So we kind of just pay attention to that thing. And that was the first thought I had was, how much of Ty Dillon's salary is being subsidized by Pop. And that's not a knock on anybody, because everybody does this racing thing the way they best know how to do it. But, yeah, does that absolutely benefit Germain Racing to be able to take Geico's money and spend more of it on the race car and less of it on the driver? I mean, potentially. Sure. I
think it's a great point. I mean, it's absolutely true that it's a good move for Germain Racing. We have a listener question here from Suzette McGuire at McGuire Suzette asks us, where do you think Casey Mears is going to land since he's been released? Any talk on the circuit that any beat that you've got, Nate?
I haven't heard any. I know he's been looking pretty much since September. This did not come as a surprise to him either. As you guys note, I mean, this was pretty much one of the worst kept open secrets. Not that any secrets are kept very well in racing, but I think it's sort of up to him. I mean, I would think that if he wanted to take a really low tier ride, there might be opportunities available, but he might be like Greg Biffle has said, and that he doesn't really want to stick around to run in an uncompetitive car just to take a paycheck. I know that, like Greg Biffle, Casey Mears has expressed interest in maybe doing some media stuff, some radio or TV or whatever. So that might be a possibility. I don't know if there's a landing spot for him, much like Biffle, for a full time ride that's competitive that would meet his standards.
Yeah, and I think, you'd mentioned Indy. I had mentioned some wacko thing that he did in France, and it seems like he's the type of guy who would also just drive anything. So maybe he'd even look outside of NASCAR. I don't know. But, I mean, probably nobody's going to pay him, a bucket of money to to come over to their series and run it. But, I think he's got plenty of options there, and still a great racer. Suzette also asks about Austin Theriault. I always say that wrong because I hear it on the radio and then I read it here and I mess it up. Anyway, what's his chances for a full-time trucks ride next year?
I wish I had some insight on that, but I really don't, and I would be misleading you if I claimed to have.
We like rumors and misleading and hand-wavy.
So here's the things that we know. We know that Brad and Brad Keselowski Racing has fielded 2 trucks last year for the championship and has sometimes fielded a third. We know that those 2 guys that ran for the truck championship both got rides in Xfinity. And we know that Tim Cindric's kid got one of those rides, so there may be a full-time ride open at BKR. I think that's sort of the cloud, right. The hovering cloud is Austin Theriault the guy that's the fit for a full-time ride at Brad Keselowski Racing, or is he a fit for the part-time ride? And
that would be a reunion because he ran for BKR a couple of years ago, right? I think before he had that horrible accident at Vegas that cracked his Hans device or whatever. And by the way, I will say that I've only spoken to him I think that time Austin Theriault did a media session at the NASCAR Hall of Fame after that wreck, and it came across very well, very articulate, very well spoken. Much like anybody I think who drives for Brad Keselowski. And I'll add this too while we're talking Truck Series. I think Brad Keselowski Racing and Kyle Busch Motorsports, there's a lot of undue criticism for both of those guys. Sometimes I think from fans who think that clearly both of those guys are brash. They say what they feel sometimes, and sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. But you cannot criticize Brad Keselowski or Kyle Busch for not putting their money where their mouth is, and that's into driver development and series development. I mean, both those guys give back through those truck teams to give guys like Daniel Hemrick and Tyler Reddick a chance or a William Byron or an Eric Jones. All those guys went through those truck teams, and I
the
think,
future stars that
I'm
getting goosebumps.
Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski probably don't get enough credit for being building blocks at such a young age in NASCAR.
Well, you're 100% correct, and there are very few people that are willing to develop people at a loss.
And that's what Brad Keselowski
and Brad
said.
and Kyle have both said individually that it's a low single-digit $1 million hobby for them to develop their truck teams in terms of a loss. Like our hobby is we do this podcast and we maybe occasionally get to talk to cool people like Nate Ryan, and we spend a little bit of money keeping that up and making sure that we still get to do that. Yeah. So these race car drivers that are willing to develop guys are spending 7 figures at a loss to make sure that the sport remains what they always thought it should be, and giving people a chance to drive really good equipment and find out if they can drive race cars. And I think that's lost on all the people that are tired of seeing, especially Kyle win on Saturday, but even to a lesser point in the 22 ride for Penske, Joey and Brad win, 6, 7, 8 races a year doing that. Of course, did they even win this year? They had a bad year, but typically they grab a few themselves. So I don't know. I think we got to applaud Brad and Kyle for doing what they do with the trucks, because how many of those kids are going to end up being Cup stars in the next 5 to 7 years?
Oh, Eric Jones might even have a freaking
He might be a Cup star next year.
Yeah. And I don't think William Byron is very far behind. So
no, it's whenever Junior wants to hang up the cleats.
Yeah. Nate, so let's talk about what's going on this weekend. We've got the banquet, and the coverage is on NBC. Are you going?
I am not going to be in Las Vegas, but as you mentioned, NBC ESN, the place to watch. We'll have plenty of coverage on the site. We'll have lots of video on NBCSports.com/NASCAR starting Friday. I'm sure we'll probably have some Thursday as well, but definitely like all of the award ceremony speeches, if that's what you're into. And certainly last year we got a huge response from Jeff Gordon's farewell. That was very eloquent, and we had that on the site. So if you can't catch it on NBCSN, we'll have you covered with all the speeches and the videos Friday on the site. And we'll also, Dustin, myself, and Daniel McFadden and Kelly Crandall, Jerry Budkowski, we have an excellent staff of writers keeping track of what's being said Thursday at the media availabilities, and again Friday with the banquet speeches, and lots of coverage this week, even though it is the off season.
Yeah, excellent. Looking forward to that. So we got our silly season questions. So we do our tearing it down, which is kind of what happened this past week, and then usually we do the gassing it up, which is what's happening next week. But now it's just silly season, so we just talk about rumors and stuff. Big rumor right now is around the Cup sponsor, and when in the world are they going to say that or announce that? We've been talking about it for a couple weeks in terms of them having to take pictures now with like green screen where the sponsor is going to be so that they can edit it in later. Latest rumor even says they may drop the word Cup from the Cup. I wouldn't even know what to call it anymore if I can't call it Cup, because that's about the only way I like. Well, there's Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup. So. And half the time I say Nationwide or Busch Series on the middle one too, so
right,
and mess that up. But yep. So have you heard anything? What are your thoughts on what the conundrum and what they're going through?
Sorry, the connection like ceased right before you said that. You were asking
It's all good.
me.
What do you think?
Yeah, what do you think about how we haven't had a title sponsor announcement sheet yet?
I think it's there's no way to say this except to be blunt. I mean, I think it's made people a little bit skittish.
Yeah,
very.
In the garage, because it's been going on 2 years and a couple of weeks that Sprint announced that they weren't going to be back. And if you compare this time frame to the only other time frame we really have in recent memory, which was RJR announced that the Winston brand would be leaving after the 2003 season. They announced that in February, and in June, that would be 4 months later, NASCAR was announcing what was then Nextel as its next title sponsor.
Right.
So, when you go from a 4-month title sponsor search to 23 months and counting, it's a little disconcerting. It certainly seems as if things are moving in the right direction. At least that's what we're being told by NASCAR executives when they've been asked. Although there was at one point where we were told that it seemed like it was going to be the fall that they would be announcing something, and that's pretty much come and gone now. So it sounds like it's not going to be announced this week. I'm not spilling the soup here to tell you guys that, as I'm sure you've read, like Monster Energy apparently is a finalist.
The Monster Cup.
Yeah, but they just picked up something where they eliminated what the name of the series was, and the reason why I wanted to interject there was, there is this sort of conversation about removing Cup, and I almost understand it. I don't like it, but I almost understand it because I never called the Sprint Cup or the Nextel Cup the Nextel or the Sprint Cup.
Yeah,
I called it Cup.
Right.
Yeah,
I didn't identify with a sponsor. I identified it with a series.
Well, you see, I did the same thing with trucks. I didn't say Camping World.
And we're the same way with trucks. It's only the middle tier.
Yeah,
where we have been. What we call
branding is really there inherently for Xfinity Series, like it is for Norris. And when Sprint then Nextel came in, there was a lot of discussion then if they would keep Cup, and there were some quarters that expected that they wouldn't. That it was so synonymous with Winston and RJ Reynolds that why would you want to keep Cup? So, but I don't know, man. Like I've heard conflicting things here. Like several months ago, I heard that they were going to rebrand the series with the title sponsor, but they were still going to keep Cup in some fashion. Like you would race in the XX series, but you would still compete for the whatever Cup. They would still keep Cup in it, but they wouldn't necessarily have it as part of the title of the series itself. I think with Monster Energy, what's interesting is they already have a Monster Energy Cup. It's a Supercross event that company sponsors.
Yeah, they would have had something there.
They went all in.
That's where if we truly are in like end stage negotiations of that company putting its name on NASCAR's Premier Series, that might be what's causing complications. But I say that again with like almost zero inside knowledge, despite you guys having me on here as somebody who purports.
This is why we're in the silly season segment. This is where we speculate and
this is the
talk about untruths
part of the year.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I almost got excited when they said Monster Energy might want to get involved because I thought that would be a way to connect multiple series or multiple sports because I know Monster has been heavily involved with the PBR at times. I don't know if they are right now, but certainly, the motorcycle sports they've been heavily involved with, and there's a ton of crossover. They're heavily involved with WWE. There's a lot of crossover with those fan bases. So I had to throw WWE.
I think it's good for NASCAR, Sherwin, because like the sport takes so many hits for having this graying, aging demographic, and people saying like, where are the young fans going to come from? If you have a brand like that seems, I mean, Supercross is like a marketer's dream. I mean, they drool over their younger demographics. If you have a company that is involved in that wants to come to NASCAR, I think you can position that if you're NASCAR as a really good sign.
Yeah, I 100%.
yeah,
100%.
No, that's a great point to bring in the crowds and everything.
Well, you don't have to worry about age if you've got a caffeine sponsorship.
yeah, no kidding. All right, I'm being more turned on by it. Well, I shouldn't say turned on. That sounds
turned
weird.
up.
Turned up by it. Yeah. Monster. Let's do it. All right, Nate. Every guest that we have, we always ask them the same question toward the very end, and we've gotten so many good responses. So, love to hear your take on this. And the question is, if you could change one thing about NASCAR, what would it be? And we always say it could be, to put butts in the seats, it could put eyeballs on the TV, it could make the racing better, or just be something that, that you really want to see just on a personal level, even if it blows up the sport. Just curious about that. So what do you think?
Mine's probably somewhat redundant. You've probably heard it from other guests, but it would be the schedule. It would be compacting the schedule so that it didn't run so many months. Not necessarily compacting the number of races, although I think mid-30s is a little bit on the high end. I think if you could go low 30s and run races, multiple races during the course of a week and somehow get the schedule down from an unwieldy 10 months to like 6 or 7 or 8, that would just be more manageable and make more sense. And I'd also like to see them, and again, this is pie in the sky stuff that's never going to happen, but put some sort of limit on the number of races that a track can have during the course of a season. And that doesn't mean that like a track doesn't get 2 annual races every year or can't have, maybe you rotate tracks that have 2 annual races and find a way to bring in markets and cities that don't have NASCAR racing. There was a golden age about a decade ago where it looked like NASCAR's track building expansion boom was going to reach Seattle, New York, and Denver. And unfortunately, none of those 3 materialized. And I don't think you can maybe put permanent facilities in those places, but if they could find a way to thread the needle and put like a street race in Seattle or in New York, Manhattan or whatever, obviously that, again, pie in the sky stuff. But I really think that would go a long way toward re-energizing interest in NASCAR.
I think what would be a really good idea is if we had windows like where they just signed a 5-year contract, so every track knows that the races they had 2 years ago they were going to have for 5 years. So we just finished year 2 of that. I think what would be great is if you had a 5-year window where you would say, I don't know, a track like Bristol probably always deserves to get 2, but let's say Pocono or Michigan. Well, I don't know, but it doesn't matter what the track is. I don't want to call anybody out because I don't want to single out anybody's fans that like going to 2 races. But maybe over a course of 5 years, you get 7 races, and then we figure out how to do what to do with the other 3.
Yep, that would be. David Poole, the late David and great David Poole, did a column probably about 15 years ago in which he kind of advocated for something like that, where you would have 5 or 6 tracks that would rotate. I don't know how many races, maybe 8 races or something like that. So the same track wouldn't host 2 races every year, but maybe they'd host 2 races every 2nd or 3rd or 4th year in some way that would allow them to still generate some revenue comparable to what they have now with 2 races every year, but still allow for some diversity in the schedule. And I know this gets in, again, this is pie in the sky stuff because these tracks are owned by public companies that aren't going to take, if you just take, $10 million less annually, it'll be for the good of the sport. They're just, you're not going to get that when you have people that answer to shareholders. So these are things that really are kind of intractable problems that probably aren't going to be solved in our lifetimes.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Rusty has said a lot when we get into discussions like this, just the 2 of us privately, is leave me wanting more, not less.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in markets where it's pretty obvious that we've oversaturated, pull one and let's see what the response is. But if we go ahead and give some sort of contractual relationship, say, look, in 2018, there's only going to be 1 race at Pocono. But the other race that they would normally have, we're going to send to Nazareth and see what happens. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of pie in the sky with that, as you mentioned, in terms of is the facility up to date enough
to handle that.
But there are other options than that. That's just an example that stuck in my head immediately. But if we could do these 5-year contracts, but not guarantee that everybody gets all the races they get today, I think we could do some more interesting things that would get more people involved with the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're finding out more and more, TV and series sponsorship is where a ton of the money is, and it's not necessarily attendance. So, we can go to a track that has 30,000, 25,000, something like that, if it's out somewhere. And,
yeah, we talked about this for the All-Star
Yeah.
race. Why in the hell wouldn't you do that at Hickory Motor Speedway?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you try that out?
Yep. Give it a try. It's right there. It's ready for you. So, no, the great answer. And I actually, believe it or not, we've never had that answer before. Everybody has a different take on it and stuff. We've had similar stuff like put in more short tracks or something like that. But I think you bring up something that a lot of people have talked about before too, but that we haven't heard on the podcast yet. So, all right, last question, and we'll round it out. It's strange with Stang. Here we go. All right, this one. All right, here we go. Would you so we've got a would you rather this week from Ashley J. Stang.
Yeah, there's like two pieces of this.
Yeah. So would you rather? So the first one is would you rather go 60 hours without sleep? And that's a lot. I mean, I know,
but there's more to this. So hang
people.
on. But there's a what you have to do after would you rather.
Right. Or the other would you rather side, right, is be without your glasses or contacts. In other words, be blind, which is interesting because you wear glasses, I wear glasses, Sherman wears contacts, so we're all in this together here. And have to do a very high pressure, career altering, intimidating interview, right? So I think that's our would you rather.
So lack of sleep or poor vision.
But 60 hours, man. I mean, even in our fraternity days when we,
I was going to say,
had to do some
we
stuff.
did 60 hours and no sleep, but we certainly didn't have to perform a life-altering activity as 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
19-year-olds.
So is the question, would you go 60 hours without sleep and then also do the interview? Is that how this is set up?
Yeah. So you
got to do the interview no matter what.
You either go sleepless or visionless.
I got you.
For this super intimidating interview.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll take off my glasses right now and just say.
I think you're the least blind of the three of us.
It could
so when
be.
I take my contacts out, I absolutely am illegal to drive. I am.
Oh, I'm not legal to drive. That's for
I'm
sure.
10 feet away from me blind.
I got you.
I'll find my way around the house if the lights are on. Well, the lights are off. It's not going to matter anyway. But that was stupid. But I am super blind.
Yeah. But and intimidating. See, I'm not intimidated in interviews,
but
either.
I don't
That's
mind
the
being
thing.
blind.
Yeah,
I
can close my eyes still too. So that's fine.
At 35 years old, where I'm at in my career,
yeah.
If the interview is going to be super intimidating and life-altering, I assume that means there's a lot at stake. This is a really good job I'm trying to get.
Yeah,
I would much rather be blind than sleep deprived.
Yeah, for sure. Because sleep deprived is like being drunk. Would you rather be wasted talking to this guy, or would you rather? So, Nate, what do you think?
Without the confidence.
Nate, you agreeing with us?
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you guys. I'm not good on 3 hours sleep, much less 60 hours of no sleep. So, I'd much prefer to fall back on my journalistic sensibilities somehow and tough out the interview without being able to see.
We're gonna have to ask Matt Weaver next time because he regularly goes without sleep and
he doesn't have eye correction. I don't think.
I don't think so. No, so he'd have to close his eyes or something. And I think he complains about not getting any sleep, and then he stays up another 3 hours watching DVR of wrestling.
For sure.
What are you doing?
Well, with Matt Weaver, you also add the element of driving for 1,500 miles.
Yes, you do.
No sleep for 60 hours.
Oh
or whatever,
man,
so
love you, Matt Weaver.
Level.
He was on the show last week, so hopefully he doesn't dump us forever now. All right, and I'll keep the second part for next week. Let's do that. The other part of the question.
Oh, yeah.
Or the second question that she sent. We'll save that one for next week, Ashley. And we'll start closing this thing down. Nate, we can't tell you how awesome it was to have you on here. We hope we ain't scared you away or nothing like that. We've had an absolute blast drinking our beer, doing our thing. Where can people find you? What do you need to promote? Tell us all about it.
NBCSports.com/NASCAR is the place to go for content on the website. I do some writing there. That also has links to the podcast, which you guys have so graciously promoted so
go
often.
Listen to that podcast.
And that
so
is
cool.
available virtually anywhere you can find podcasts. That's iTunes, Stitcher, Audio Boom, Google Play, Spotify. know them all by heart these days. Hopefully, if you like podcasts, you can find that relatively easy and listen. And occasionally, I'll be on a TV set on NBCSN doing NASCAR America. So it was really my pleasure to do this. It was an honor to be here. And again, I'm really glad I was able to reciprocate all the support you guys have thrown the podcast way. I appreciate it.
Now, we really appreciate having you, Nate. It's been a lot of fun interacting in the Twitter sphere, as it were. One thing you can share with your podcast listeners, if they don't know, I know for sure this is true on the iPodcast app. You can set it to 1.5x speed.
Yes.
And it's awesome because it cuts out, it really limits those pauses that we all have, the ums and the ahs that just come with talking on a mic. I mean, even the local radio guys on Sports Talk do it. And that makes it fun. And as it turns out, the jokes deliver quicker, so sometimes they're even funnier.
Yeah, right.
Like when they happen. So that's good too.
Yeah.
This is funny because I was just talking to Jeff Gluck about this today. I actually suggested that to him a couple of months ago after picking up that tip somewhere, and he does it now too. It's amazing like how your brain can process things at whatever that would be, 45 or 78 RPM as opposed to the normal 33 and a half that we're typically subsisting on.
Well, for sure. And if you listen to like 3-hour podcasts like I do with Joe Rogan, you get to do that in 2 hours. Like that's a significant time that you've gained
time
back.
saving.
So
it's like making money. Like
yeah,
you're like
right?
time back in your life.
Exactly.
Just invented. You just got to press this mash this button. All right, Nate, we'll let you roll. Thank you so much for being on, and hopefully we'll catch you sometime again soon. Enjoy the off season, man.
You too, Rusty and Sherwin. Thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, bud.
Awesome.
Bye. Sherwin.
Well, why don't we go ahead and announce we have Nate Ryan's colleague next week, Kelly Crandall.
Kelly Crandall will be
Look
here.
forward to that.
Excellent.
We're going to start closing this thing out. And
Excellent.
We're
Let's
fresh
do it.
out of jelly beans.
We got jelly beans. Here you go. Have you some.
Jelly beans.
Yep, get you some. I'm going to bring
All right, we're closing her out. Kelly
bring this
Crandall
up.
next week.
Here we go.
Nate Ryan is such a good human being. It's hard to give him too many compliments.
We're in the off season and we got nothing to talk about yet. We talked for over an hour. So here we go. Can't thank him enough. That is awesome.
Oh, there you go.
Show.
Oh, yeah, man,
we're humbled. He says
Jelly
it's
bean
an honor to
closeout
be
challenge.
on. And
a little whiskey too.
you don't even know how much we appreciate it. So
I
anyway,
hope he's still listening, but he might have hung up. You never know.
y'all know where to find us. PETMpodcast.com, at PETM Podcast, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, PETM Racing Podcast on YouTube, Pregame ENG at Pregame ENG on the Twitter and on the Instagram, and this made up stuff I don't even know about yet.
And y'all find me, Tailgate Mayor, at Tailgate Mayor. We're going to talk to y'all next week. It's the off season, baby. Jelly beans getting sticky.
Damn good jelly bean.